That is Jake Hatch of Locked On Cougars. And oddly enough, why not bring him on to talk a little bit about Utah? They have fired their basketball coach, Craig Smith. And the first thing I pointed to in this is BYU is the reason why. BYU is the reason why because there's an arms race between those two schools, to me, outside source, that is more aggressive than ever of mine is bigger. I can do it better. And if you start losing to BYU, or if you fall behind as an athletic department the way football did last year, now more than maybe ever that they're in the same conference, you must win. You must win not just against one another, but in general, from a revenue standpoint. Otherwise, you are fired if you cannot do what BYU is doing as a Utah Ute, or you're fired if you cannot do what the Utes are doing as a coach at BYU. I think, and maybe it's toxic, it feels like BYU has a hand in now every decision that Utah makes when it comes to its staff.
Well, you're dead on with that. Here's the deal, Drake. Craig Smith, if the reports are to be believed, he essentially was let go because his relations with the NIL donor base at Utah, which already is in question as to how lucrative and how deep a pool it is, had soured. And when you essentially the people that are funding your program with those NIL checks, that relationship goes south, well, there goes the coach, and we got to start over there. You're right. BYU, and they had a booster tell Myron Medcalf from ESPN that we, quote, we will not be outbid, unquote. I never in a million years, Drake, having covered BYU as long as I have, would have ever expected a booster from BYU would be so bold to say that on the record to a national reporter. But guess what? They have laid out what they're going to do, and BYU's got deep-pocketed boosters who are stepping to the forefront. And Ryan Smith obviously takes a lot of the notoriety being the owner of the Utah Jazz, Utah Hockey Club, and a few other pro franchises here. But he is not the only one. They have got dozens upon dozens of other tech executives. They work in multiple fields who have got hundreds of millions of dollars in reserve, apparently, that are willing to invest it into BYU. And so long as that happens, University of Utah is saying, okay, we got to be able to match that in some form or fashion. And you're right. What BYU does is going to affect Utah and vice versa. Anything that Utah succeeds with and BYU fails at, guess what? It's going to have an impact on both of these two programs.
Jake, let's talk about Ryan Smith, who owns the Utah Jazz, the Utah Hockey Club, the soccer team. He owns pretty much every major sports entity out there. There are Utah fans that are very upset that a guy who is so involved in the public sphere, who is so involved in different sports teams that do take taxpayer money for stadiums or venues or different things, like this is a guy who's he directly has ownership of Utah fans' favorite teams, favorite pro teams, and he won't give a dime. He won't divvy out, help out, become somebody who can be a trusted Utah donor as well. I see that on message boards all the time, on Twitter all the time. Why isn't Ryan Smith giving to Utah? Because of what the state of Utah gives to him. Why is that? Is there a leg to stand on if you're a Utah fan for Ryan Smith being all in on the BYU Cougars?
Here's the deal. Ryan Smith has made it very clear that BYU supported his father and his family during a time of a health crisis in that family's in a period of life before Ryan became ultra wealthy, and his dad did and his brother did. They're all in on this Qualtrics deal when it really blew up. Before that, BYU supported that family through a really trying time in that family's circle. And that has endeared BYU into the hearts and minds of the Smith family, in particular, Ryan Smith. Utah fans can whine all they want, but they have some really deep-pocketed individuals up there. I think of the Huntsman family. I think of the Eccles family, the Garf family in the auto industry. You've got to get those people motivated and start having those people donate, because they are the people that will make the tangible difference here and hopefully counter what Ryan Smith and other boosters at BYU are doing. Ryan's not the biggest donor to BYU's NIL fund. I hate to break it to anybody out there. I'm sure Utah fans will love to bash me in my comments for making that statement, but I have it on very good authority that he is not the biggest NIL donor for BYU. He is contributing to NIL, absolutely, but Ryan grew up a BYU guy. He's a BYU fan, and the way that BYU supported his family during a time of need, well, guess what? That has engendered some love and respect on both sides, and BYU's benefiting from it.
Utah, it sounds as though, from the outside looking in, is struggling in the NIL category more than BYU, despite those reports last week that BYU's NIL collective director spoke to the team and said, "You're all greedy little pigs. I'm not giving you any money." Why would the guy who works at McDonald's, like the manager of McDonald's, walk in and say, "I hate all of you, back to work"? Like that. It didn't happen, right?
Well, here's the thing the conversation, Min Kim, who they quoted, who's the CEO of NutriCost, who's actually one of the bigger donors to BYU's NIL fund, that meeting absolutely did happen, Drake. I can report that because I have it on multiple fronts that meeting did occur. And he essentially said what he said in that circumstance. The issue was at the time, BYU got a major boost on the NIL front when they joined the Big 12 conference. A lot of boosters were excited. We're in the Power 5. We finally living the dream that BYU wanted to do. And then you go out and suffer a 5-7, a losing season in college football. Guess what? People don't want to pay for losers. And that's what Min Kim said. I want to pay for winners. Guess what? Everybody wants to pay for a winner. That's the simple fact of the matter. So guess what? When some boosters started pulling away and pulling back some of the money they had originally allotted to NIL, all of a sudden you got to go and find new boosters. They got reinvigorated with an 11-2 season this past year in football. And that's a credit to the players, the coaches, the administrators, everybody involved with BYU football. Suddenly the money's flowing once again into that program. I wouldn't be surprised if another report, probably won't come from the Salt Lake Tribune, comes out that says, hey, BYU has restored a bunch of the money that they may have pulled back from some of these players because there's more money in the NIL fund, there's more money from the collective, etc. But the simple fact of the matter is everybody, and I mean not just BYU, across the board, when you're contributing hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars, when what you perceive to be your ROI, your return on investment, doesn't match up with what you expect, well, guess what? You're going to be more reticent to contribute money to that fund. And that was the result of what happened with the 5-7 season. Well, they go 11-2 the next year, and suddenly that spigot is wide open again.
Yeah, so interesting, the entire story that came out with that with BYU. But after doing research, it seems like Utah is reeling. Their fan base, at the very least, is not excited about where NIL is. Their coaching staff is not, on the basketball side at the very least. And for BYU, NIL is better now than it really has ever been. The commitment is better now than it has been. What is the limit, right? We talk about, for BYU in the next few years, what's the ceiling with the money that's seemingly rolling in? It feels like BYU, who was the sleeping giant when they joined the Big 12, is finally waking up.
You're right. And that's the thing about this is BYU is finally realizing, hey, we can be a force at this level. And obviously it requires millions of dollars. It's just money speaks. And BYU has got a booster group that is ultra motivated to help BYU as much as they possibly can to elevate them to top tier status in the Big 12 conference. This is a program, Drake, that when they were in the WAC and the Mountain West, they were one of, if not the preeminent program in both of those leagues during long stretches of their history in both of those leagues. They went independent for well over a decade with the whole goal of living the dream they're living now. And now that they're living it, guess what? The money's starting to flow in. And as we have seen in college sports across the board, the more you invest in programs, there's a direct correlation to success in whatever sport you're investing it in. In this case, football and basketball. And BYU, they're going to be a force in this conference for years to come if they continue doing what they're doing.
Jake, I am continually made fun of and berated on Twitter and YouTube for being such a big BYU homer, but I've had JT Wistersill on this show 3 times since the last time you joined. So I just want to make it very clear here that I have no favorites in this league, though BYU has always been kind to me. Where can more folks find your work?
If you want all things BYU in a podcast form, check out Locked On Cougars, wherever you get your podcasts, also on YouTube. If you want my thoughts on all things sports, you can check out 2 different places. Locked On Cougars on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, or my personal Twitter feed, Jacob C. Hatch. Love to interact with anybody who wants to reach out at any time.
That's Jake Hatch. This has been a crossover of Locked On BYU and Locked On. Thanks for making it your Locked On Cougars and Locked On. Thanks for making it your first listen every single day. Dose Grande.